Hey everybody, this is Angel. You're watching ASMR Angel Reads. We're still on Chapter 5 of Daggerspell, Section 2 of Chapter 5, which has got a couple more parts to go, and then will be Section 3, Chapter 5, and then I think Chapter 5 is over with by then, but we'll see. Last time, Nevin and Adern discovered that Lane, the rogue half-elf who's Adern's son, is stark raving mad, and he's using the black arts in the Dwemer. And Nevin found a wild folk. That's like their fairies and gnomes and stuff. Nevin found a wild folk who was deformed by dark magic, and he sent it back to his realm so that he can get fixed. And that's about it. Now we'll continue. On the morrow, Rodri made sure Colin rode next to him, even though Paradir and Dawamir both made nasty remarks about the silver daggers. The army set out, angling toward the northeast, and in a mile or two reached the settled farmland of Eldid. The roads and lanes rambled between fenced fields, farmsteads, pastures, and stretches of open meadows and woods, all jumbled together with no true pattern. Since there was no law that made farmers will all their holdings to only their eldest son, the land got cut up into patchworks that made any kind of straight travel difficult. At noon, they stopped to rest on a strip of unused land between the triangular fields of the cabbage and turnips. While Colin and Rodri were sharing a chunk of salt meat to go with their soda bread, Adern trotted over, looking grim. Corbin's army is turning south, Lord Cadvaroc. They've stopped about 3 miles away. Well and good, then they're as sick of this cursed game of Karnak as I am. Rodri tossed a chunk of meat to Colin, then rose painfully, aware that all the lords were looking at him for orders. We're leading the baggage train under guard of the spearmen. The rest of us will arm and ride to meet them. If the bastards want a chance at me so cursed badly, then let's give it to them. They cheered him and what they saw as his courage, never knowing that Rodri had a simple desire to get dying over with. Unless perhaps Colin guessed how he felt, because the silver dagger merely looked distracted, as if his thoughts were far away. Thanks to Adern's detailed report, Rodri knew exactly where to draw up the army. Corbin was marching his men down the road as straight as he could. It was not the Devery way of hedging and maneuvering for position once the battle was unavoidable. A mile north, the road crossed a big cow pasture. As the army clattered along, frightened farmers stared at them from fields or ran away from the roadside. When the marchers reached the pasture, there wasn't a cow in sight. From long experience, the peasantry knew something about the art of war. Rodri drew up his men in a single line, a crescent with the embraced facing the road. He personally rode down the line and disposed the various war bands. For all that Rodri was young, he'd been riding to battle since he was 14. His father and uncles had trained him ruthlessly for war. When he came to the left flank, he found 2 Westfolk there, wearing salvaged mail and carrying short bows that they held crosswise. Their horses had no bridles. So, Rodri said, you know how to ride in a fight as well as stand and shoot, do you? Oh, in truth, Calandril said with a grin. These are just hunting bows. I'll be interested to see how they do as weapons of war. What, here, if you've never ridden in this kind of scrap before, there's no dishonor in staying out of it. There is, dishonor and twice dishonor. I want vengeance for my slaughtered friend. Genitar nodded in agreement, his mouth set. Then may the gods of your people protect you, and I admire your guts. Rodri trotted back and took up his position in the center of the line, with Cullen on his left and Canarid on his right. By the honor of the thing, Corbin would be at the head of the charging wedge when the attack came, and the two Cadverdagian would close with each other while their men turned into a mob all around. Except for the occasional stamp of a horse and jingle of tack, the waiting line fell silent. Each man wrapped in his own thoughts. Now that his weird was coming to meet him, Rodri felt perfectly calm, except that he'd never seen such a beautiful afternoon. Every blade of grass in the meadow seemed preternaturally green, and the sunlight preternaturally golden. Some distant trees looked like green velvet against the sapphire sky. It seemed a pity to leave all that behind for the shadows of the other lands. Then, far down the road, he saw a plume of dust. He bent down and drew a javelin from the sheath under his right leg. "Here they come." All down the line, javelins' points winked in the sun as the men took on faith what they couldn't see. One last time, shields were settled, swords loosened in scabbards, as the horses danced, feeling the coming battle in their riders' moods. The plume of dust came closer, swelled like smoke from a fire sweeping down the road. Rodri forgot that he was sure he was going to die. He felt himself smiling as if his face would split from it. As the battle fit took him over, it seemed that his body had turned as light as air. About 500 yards away, Corbin's army broke from the marching line and swirled around to form a wedge for the charge. Rodri chuckled as he saw the green and tan shields of Corbin's warband take the head. Soon he and the men who had rebelled against the rule would face off in a single combat. As for the rest, there were over 300 men out there, and a nice fair fight. In anticipation, his own army moved forward at a pace or two, but it held its formation. Finally, silver horns rang out among the enemies. Howling out war cries, Corbin's men charged. Closer, closer, with the dust pluming all around them, they came, slapping into the crescent. Rodri rose in his stirrups, threw his javelin overhand into the mob, and then drew his sword on the follow-through. The lines of darts aced up, winking as if they fell indiscriminately among Corbin's men, who answered with a straight fling of their own. Rodri bounced one off his shield, then kicked his horse into a gallop and charged straight for the riders in the lead. Screaming war cries, his men surged forward, falling from the flanks to close the circle of death. Rodri began to laugh, the bubbling, choking battle laugh that he could never control on the field. He heard himself howling like a madman as he closed with the lead rider. He ducked under a clumsy swing, slashed in, getting a nick on the enemy's arm, and then realized that he was facing an ordinary rider, not Corbin at all. He threw up his sword in a parry and risked glancing around. No sign of Corbin. He was trapped. Men were pouring around him, mobbing for him in a tight circle. Rodri desperately swung his horse around and felt the grazing blow bounce off the mail on his back as he charged straight for a young rider. The lad gave ground. He was almost out. More men closed the gap. His laugh rose to a howl as he saw how neatly his honor had trapped him. He'd fallen for the false decoy like a waterfowl. "Rodri!" It was Colin's voice close at hand. Rodri swung his horse around just as Colin cut through the closing circle and fell into place beside him. Their horses nose to tail so that they could guard each other's left. "Parry!" Colin screamed at him. "Forget the kills." Twisting in his saddle, ducking and parrying, shield and sword both, Rodri followed orders and fought for his life. He felt a blow graze his shoulder, twisted and flung up his shield against another. The wood cracked. A blade flashed in toward the face. He caught it on his sword. For a moment the blades hung locked, then someone else struck him from the back, and Rodri had to pull free. He flung up his shield just in time. It cracked again, splitting down the middle to the boss. Over his own laughter, the battle cries around him, he heard his men screaming, "To Rodri, to Rodri!" Suddenly the man straight ahead of him in the crush tried to pull his horse's head around. The Cannibane warband was beginning to fight through. Rodri had no time to take advantage. He parried a slash from the side with his sword, then twisted in the saddle to take another on his shield. The crack ran together with the first one, and half the shield fell away. Rodri howled like a banshee and went on parrying with half a shield. All at once the horse to his right screamed with a ghastly half-human sound that horses only make in agony, and reared straight up. As it came down stumbling, Kenrid killed its rider from behind. Amir was right behind him, swinging like a fiend, and Rodri's two men were through. "My lord," Colin yelled, "follow me out." Rodri swung his horse around as Kenrid and Amir fell in behind him, but he refused to follow any man. He spurred his horse up beside Colin, ducked under a slash, and slashed back at the enemy on his right. The blow missed the fellow's clumsy parry and caught him on the rib, making him grunt and sway in the saddle. Rodri slashed back from the other side and knocked the dazed rider off his horse to fall under the feet of his comrade's horse beside him. When that horse reared, disrupting the mob on the side, Rodri and his men could begin to move forward, cutting their way out of the mob at the same time as the rest of the Cannibane warband tried to cut its way in. It was a slow thing, forcing their horses ahead in a sheer will, leaning, slashing, dodging, always striking at the nearest enemy, while Corbin's men tried to parry Colin and strike at Rodri. The silver dagger fought silently, looking utterly bored as he struck and parried with terrifying ease, as if he were some natural force, a storm wind blowing among the screaming, crushing mob. They were almost out when someone pushed in past Kenrid and in the rear and slashed Rodri's horse hard. With a scream the gelding reared. Rodri knew it would never come down alive. He slipped his feet free from the stirrups and threw the remains of his shield as it fell. He flung himself over the horse's neck and rolled, but with calm clarity he knew that he was doomed. A hoof kicked him in the middle of the back, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. All around him he heard screams and war cries. All he could see were the legs of horses. Grunting in pain, he pulled himself up to kneel and twisted out of the way just in time to avoid a kick to the head. He heard Colin screaming at someone to pull back, and only then did he realize that he was under the hooves of his own men's horses. Another kick came his way and grazed his shoulder. All at once, hands grabbed him and pulled him to his feet. Rodri twisted around and landed against Colin's shoulder just as the terrified horse backed up and nearly fell on the pair of them. Colin dragged Rodri back just in time and shoved him against the side of his horse. "Can you mount?" Colin yelled. Grasping for breath, Rodri hauled himself into the saddle. Ahead of him he saw his own men cutting hard, driving the enemy back. The horse danced and shuddered, but Rodri got it under control, then kicked his feet free of the stirrups to let Colin mount behind him. Colin put one long arm around his waist and took the reins. Over the shouting, a silver horn rang out a retreat. Rodri's first thought was that his side had lost the battle. Then he remembered that this time he was the Cadvarok and that the horn had to be Corbin's. The enemies around him fell back and fled as the battle press broke up. "Kenrid," Rodri howled, "sound the call to stand." Colin's arm straightened slightly around his waist. "My lord, Kenrid's dead." For a moment, Rodri's mind simply refused to understand. "Rodri," Colin gave him a shake, "sound the call." Rodri drew his horn from his belt, but he merely held it. Finally, Colin grabbed it from him and blew the signal to pull back. Rodri wiped the scatter of tears away on the back of his gauntlet. Only then did he realize that he was doubled up with pain. 2 little inches to the right and a kick would have broken his spine, Nevin said. 2 lower and it would have hit his kidneys. Our Cadrock here's a silver dagger's luck. Colin nodded in agreement. Stripped to the waist, Rodri was lying in the tailgate of one of the wagons. Nevin improvised surgery. A wedge shape of red and purple had already swollen bigger than an apple on his back. Well, Erdman, I'm just as surprised that his ribs aren't broken. So am I. Rodri turned his head to look up at them. Up by his shoulders and down along his arms were more bruises and small cuts, where sword blows had driven his mail through his shirt and into his skin in a blurry pattern of rings. It was odd. Colin always thought that while bards sang of warriors slicing each other into shreds, you're generally killed by a man by beating him to death with your sword. I don't need to be fussed over like an old woman, Rodri snapped. You should be tending the men worse off than me. Nonsense. There are 3 surgeons with this army, and Adern as well, who's good with herbs as I am. Besides, the battle was only bloody in the fight round you, my lord. Colin whistled sharply under his breath because he hadn't realized it. Nevin rummaged through the package of herbs and laid ready on the wagon bed, dropped one into a mortar and added some water from the kettle that hung nearby on the tripod over a small fire. I'll make a poultice for that bruise. You won't be able to ride unless you can get the swelling down. What about you, Silver Dagger? Do you need my aid? I don't, my thanks. Those young cubs of Corbin's can't fight worth a fart of 2 copper pigs. Cursed modest, aren't you? Rodri said. Don't listen to him, Nevin. Without him, I'd be dead, and I know it. Nevin looked up sharply and stared into Colin's eyes. Colin felt as if the stare were searing his soul like a hot iron, making him remember some old guilt or shame, a memory that faded as soon as he tried to capture it. Then, it's a fine thing you've done today, Colin of Cremor, Nevin said softly. We'll see if Rodri can repay the debt he owes you. I don't want payment, Colin snarled. I know I'm not but a silver dagger, and I didn't ride into the mob for coin. That's not what I meant at all. With a toss of his head, Colin strode away. Whether the old man was Dwemer or not, he'd not let him mock. The army was settling in around the baggage train. Colin was headed towards his horse to rub it down when Lord Sliggin caught up with him. His lordship's mail was spattered with some other man's blood, and his mustache was limp with sweat. I saw you pull Rodri out of the stampede. My thanks, Silver Dagger. None needed, my lord. I promised him I'd guard him. Ha, many a honor-sworn rider forgets his oath when it comes to dismounting in the middle of a mob. By the asses of gods, man, you've got a great slight more honor than the piss-poor Corbin. Sliggin's voice rose to a bellow. You saw what happened, the coward, the base-born bastard's trick, decoying Rodri out there like that. The dishonor of the thing. Thanks every god that you saw what was happening in time. Not exactly, my lord. I was expecting somewhat like that. Sliggin's mouth went slack in disbelief. A lord who'd slaughter a merchant's caravan to trap an enemy is a lord without honor, Colin said. So when Rodri charged, I was right behind him. When at the dinner hour the lords met for council of war, Colin was invited by Perdrid himself to join them. Although by then Rodri could walk and sit up, albeit with difficulty, Colin knew that he'd be as stiff as a sword on the morrow. Both Colin and Rodri listened with rising fury as the other lords described the battle. None of them had been mobbed or even seriously threatened. They'd merely been blocked from riding to help Rodri. What gripes my very soul, Rodri said, is the way I never even saw Corbin on the field, that little coward. wasn't cowardice, Predreer said. He doesn't want to be the man who personally kills the Gorbert's brother and the tyrant's son. This way, if the time came to sue for peace, he would blame your death on the fortune of war. And that's what he's after. Curse him and his balls bath. Oh, curse him and his balls both. Sligan broke in. He'll hammer at us until something kills the Cadvarok, and then he'll place his suit. If I may speak, my lords, Cullen said, then there's only one thing to do. Kill Corbin before he has a chance to sue for anything. Blasted right, Sligan snarled. When you see a dog foaming at the mouth, you don't call the stinking kennelman, you cut its head off. They drew close together to lay their plan. In the next battle, the lords would ride as a unit with Rodri safely in the middle and Cullen and Sligan at the head. Their best men would be round them to hold off the enemy while they coursed the field and found Corbin. And I wager we'll find him at the rear, Eddard said. I'm going to tell my men to fight for blood when it comes to facing Corbin's allies. No more of this dancing all around us while they parry. It's time they saw what kind of a man they're allied themselves with. Sligan stood up with a grin and a little laugh. I'm going to go talk to the captain. I suggest the rest of you do the same. When the lords dispersed, Rodri kept Colin at his side and had his manservant bring both of them mead in wooden cups. For a while, Rodri stayed silent, drowning the mead in big gulps as he stared at the fire. Lord Cadvarok, Colin said at length, it's no dishonor to have a bodyguard when someone's trying to murder you. It's not that aches my heart. Rodri paused for another gulp of mead. I was thinking of Canrid. Amir told me that Canna ordered him forward to look at the rear by himself. He knew what that meant. So he did. He pledged to die for you, and he kept his word. But by the hells, Rodri turned to him, and there were tears glistening in the lad's eye. Don't you see that the worst of it? Here, I never ridden to the head of a warband before. Oh, I've always been Lord Rodri, but no more than my father's captain or Rice's extra man. In all the battles I ever rode, no one was dying for my wretched sake. I expected to die someday for someone else's. I've never met another noble-born man who troubled his heart about such things. Then curse them all, by the hells. Why did my uncle have to go and get himself killed? I don't want his demence. I've no doubt his lordship will feel a good bit differently about that in the morning. Oh, no doubt. Rodri stared moodily into his cup. I'd be cursed and twice cursed before I'd let Rice have it anyway. Here, I've got no right to be asking you this, but your brother is as bad a man as all that? Not in the least, about anything but me. Oh, he's just generous and brave, everything a stinking noble-born man is supposed to be, except when it comes to the matters of my affairs. Curse it if I know why he's always hated me so much. Cullen heard as much hurt and anger in the lad's voice. Well, my lord, my elder brother was much the same to me. He'd given me a good cuff whenever he could get away with it, and it didn't sweeten his temper to have ma'am take my side all the time. By the hells, Rodri looked up with an oddly embarrassed smile. Of course you had a clan, didn't you? Here I've always thinking you were somewhat like the wind and the rain, always there wandering the kingdom. Nothing of the sort. Cullen had a cautious sip of mead. My father was a shipwright down in Claremore, and the drunken bastard he was, too. I had to dodge him as much as I dodged my brother's fists, truly. And when he finally did us all a favor and drank himself to death, the priest of Bell got my mother a place in the Gorbert's kitchen. I grew up in the Dun. And is that where you learned to fight? It is. The captain of the warband took pity on the greasy scullery lad who was always playing with sticks and calling them swords. Cullen washed away his rising feelings of shame with mead. He was a good man, and then I had to break his faith in me. Rodri was listening with fascination, curiously. Cullen set the empty cup down and rose. It's late, my lord Cadvarok. If I may speak so freely, we'd best get ourselves to bed. He walked away before Rodri could call him back. Even for a Devry man, Lord Nowick was tall, 6.5 feet of solid muscle and broad bones. That night he was an angry man too, standing with his arms crossed over his chest and glowering at Corbin and the rest of the allies laid their plans. Laudelin kept a careful eye on him. Finally the Lord stepped forward with an oath that almost was a growl. I don't like this, Nowick snarled. I'm sick to my heart of all this stinking dishonor. That ruse this morning is enough. All the others turned to look at him with a flash of guilt in their eyes. Do we fight like men, or do we fight like filthy rabble? Oh, now here, Lord Synod stepped forward, a paunchy man with a thick gray mustache. Which is more dishonorable, to use the wits of the gods gave us, or to kill a noble-born men when they don't even have a feud going with them? True spoken, Corbin put in. Our quarrel's with Rodri and no one else. Pig's balls, Nowick spat out. You're afraid of the Gorberts intervening and not else. I don't like it, I tell you, sneaking around like a pack of stray dogs creeping up on the townsmen. Slop heaps. The younger lords were wavering, stung by Nowick's words, and Corbin and Synod were unable to look him in the face. Laudelin sent out a line of force from his aura and used it to slap Nowick's aura just like a child uses a whip to spin a top. The Lord staggered slightly and his eyes turned glazed. But my lord, Laudelin said in a soothing sort of voice, if we drag out the war, we could kill Sligan or Perdir by mistake. That would be a grievous thing. So it would, his anger quite gone. Nowick spoke slowly. I agree, counselor, the plan's a good one. Then no one has any objections? Corbin got in quickly. Splendid. Go give your captains their orders. As the council of war broke up, Laudelin slipped away before Corbin noticed. He couldn't bear the thought of sitting and drinking with the stinking lordship. As he walked through the camp, he noticed the men glancing sideways at him and furtively crossing their fingers to ward off witchcraft. They were afraid of him, the mangy dogs as well they might be. Let them cower before Laudelin the mighty, master of the powers of the air. At the edge of the camp he paused, debating. As badly as he wanted to get away from the army for a little while, he was quite simply afraid to go out alone with Adern so close by. Finally he went to his tent, ordered his manservant out, and laid down fully dressed on his blankets. Noise filtered in, men laughed and talked as they strode by, swords clanking at their sides. Once Laudelin's trained mind had been capable of shutting such distractions out, now they drove him to rage. Fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight, he lay shaking, trying to close down his senses and let sleep come. He did not want to summon the darkness. All at once he was afraid of it, afraid of the voice that would pour into his mind as smoothly as oil. Yet in the end it came to him. He saw first a tiny black point in his mind, then it began to swell. He fought it, tried to fill his mind with light, tried to banish the dark with a ritual gesture and curse, but inexorably it grew, billowed until it seemed to stand in a vast darkness, and the voice spoke to him gently and patiently. Why do you fear me, you of all Dwemer masters, Laudelin the mighty? All I want to do is aid you and to be your friend and ally. I came to sorrow with you so that the that so clever a plan went astray. You almost trapped Rodri today. Who are you? A friend and not more. I have information for you. That silver dagger is the key to everything. You have to kill him before you can kill Rodri. I've been meditating and doing deep workings, my friend, and I've seen that the forces of weird are at work here. Well and good, but who are you? The voice chuckled once. The blackness was gone. Laudelin lay there swearing for a moment and blessed what he just cursed, the normal human noise of the army around him. Then he got up and left the tent to find Corbin's captain. He wanted to give him some special orders about the wretched silver dagger. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.